The morning sun spilled its tender glow through the thin curtains of Ethan Hill's small, weathered home, painting the room in soft shades of gold. The world outside was still cloaked in the hush of dawn, the neighborhood streets silent save for the occasional chirp of a waking bird. Most folks were still tucked beneath their blankets, dreaming away the last moments of night. But not Ethan. He thrived in these early hours, a remnant of his military days when the quiet before the storm had been his only solace. Now, as a school bus driver, he clung to that same rhythm before the chaos, finding peace in the stillness that wrapped around him like an old friend. He moved through the house with practiced care, his steps light on the creaky wooden floor so as not to rouse Helen, his wife, who still slept upstairs, her soft breathing a faint echo in the stillness. These moments, alone with his thoughts and a steaming cup of coffee, were sacred to him, a brief respite before the world demanded his strength. In the kitchen, the rich scent of brewing coffee curled through the air, grounding him as he stood by the counter, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot. Ethan inhaled deeply, letting the warmth settle into his bones. Outside, the first rays of daylight brushed against the row of aging houses that lined his street, sturdy relics of time, their chipped paint and sagging porches telling stories of resilience. He knew this place intimately, every crack in the pavement, every family behind those peeling front doors. Life here wasn't easy, jobs were scarce, and hope often felt like a luxury few could afford. But the kids' toes bright, chaotic souls who clambered onto his bus each morning, they were the heartbeat of it all. They gave him purpose, a flicker of light in the grayness of struggle. As he sipped his coffee, its bitterness sharp against his tongue, Ethan's mind drifted to them. He wasn't just their driver, he was their shield, their steady hand in a world that too often turned its back on them. For some, his bus was more than a ride, it was a refuge, a fleeting escape from the weight of their lives. He thought of little Leela, always tucked in the front seat with a book, her shy smile a quiet victory, of Marcus, whose wild laughter could lift even the gloomiest day, and of Dryas, the lanky dreamer who dribbled an imaginary basketball wherever he went. Ethan knew their names, their quirks, their unspoken fears. He carried their stories like treasures, locked safe in his chest. His thoughts wandered further, to his son, Charlie, now miles away at Caligath, first in their family to chase that dream. Ethan's chest swelled with pride at the thought, though it ached with the distance. Every long shift behind the wheel, every paycheck scraped together, had been for Charlie a chance at a life Ethan had never known growing up. The sacrifices had been worth it, he told himself, taking another slow sip. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, nudging him toward the day ahead. With a final glance out the window at the stirring neighborhood, he set his mug in the sink, grabbed his worn jacket, and slipped out the door. The cool morning air nipped at his skin as he descended the steps, his breath fogging faintly in the chill. The bus depot was just a short walk away, and he moved with a quiet determination, his broad shoulders squared against the world. This job wasn't glamorous, no one wrote songs about school bus drivers, but it mattered. To the kids, to the families, to him. At the depot, the air buzzed with the low growl of engines warming up and the easy chatter of fellow drivers. Ethan exchanged nods and quick words with them. There was a bond here, a shared duty that tied them together like threads in a frayed tapestry. He approached his bus, running a calloused hand along its chipped yellow side, checking for dents or scratches from the day before. It was a small ritual, but it steadied him, gave him a sense of order in a life that could so easily spiral. Satisfied, he climbed aboard, settling into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life beneath him, its familiar rumble pulsing through his hands on the wheel, a steady beat that matched the rhythm of his heart. As he pulled out of the depot and onto his route, the streets stretched out before him, still draped in the soft haze of morning. The first kids piled on, their voices rising in a chorus of sleepy greetings and playful jabs. Dryas bounded up the steps, miming a jump shot with an invisible ball. Leela slipped into her usual spot, her book already open. Marcus launched into a loud impression of their teacher, earning giggles from the back. Ethan smiled to himself, letting their energy wash over him. This was his domain, a rolling sanctuary where, for a few precious minutes, they could just be kids. He let his mind drift to the weekend as the bus wound through the familiar streets. He'd planned to visit Charlie, maybe catch a game together, share a meal. It had been too long since he'd seen his son's lopsided grin. Heard his voice unfiltered by a phone line. The thought warmed him, softening the edges of the day until something shifted. In the rearview mirror, a police car slid into view, trailing just behind the bus. Its lights were off, its pace unhurried, and at first, Ethan brushed it off. Patrols sometimes followed buses, keeping an eye on the morning rush. But as he turned onto the main road, the lights flared to life, red and blue slicing through the quiet. A sharp siren wail cut the air, and the bus fell silent. The kids' chatter died mid-sentence. Their wide eyes darting to the windows, Ethan's hands tightened on the wheel, his pulse quickening. "I'm not sure what's happening," he said, forcing his voice to stay even, "but just stay seated." "Okay, everything's fine." The words felt hollow even to him. His stomach churned as he eased the bus to the roadside. The engines hum a soft undercurrent to the tension coiling inside him. The police car parked behind them, its flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the bus's interior. Two officers stepped out, their boots crunching on the gravel. Ethan's instinct screamed that this wasn't routine. There was no friendly wave, no casual glance. The taller officer, broad-shouldered and stern, strode forward, his face carved from stone. His uniform was crisp, almost to perfect, a stark contrast to the shorter, stockier man trailing him, whose eyes raked over the bus like a hawk hunting prey. Ethan rolled down the window, meeting the lead officer's gaze. "License and registration." The man barked, his voice a blade slicing through the air. Ethan nodded, swallowing the unease rising in his throat. "Sure," he said, reaching for his wallet with hands that felt suddenly numb. He handed over the papers, his fingers brushing the cold edge of the window frame. The officer snatched them without a word, flipping through them with deliberate slowness, his frown deepening. Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't sped, hadn't broken a single rule. Why was this dragging on? He opened his mouth to ask, but the officer's eyes flicked up, hard and unyielding, silencing him before he could speak. The kids watched, their faces pressed to the windows, a mix of fear and confusion etched into their young features. Darius sat rigid, his fists clenched, the usual spark in his eyes replaced by something darker. Leela clutched her book tighter, her knuckles whitening, while Marcus's bravado faded into a rare, uneasy stillness. Ethan felt their stares like a weight on his shoulders. He wanted to shield them, to turn this into just another story they'd laugh about later. But the air was thick with something ugly, something he couldn't name yet. The second officer circled the bus, peering through the windows, his movements slow and deliberate. As if searching for an excuse, Ethan's mind raced. He'd faced scrutiny before his skin, his job. His very existence often drew eyes that judged before they saw, but this was different. This was public, raw, unfolding in front of the children he'd sworn to protect. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the tall officer grilled him with questions. That made no sense. Where was he going? Why was he here? What was his business? Ethan answered calmly, though his voice trembled at the edges, each word a plea for reason. But reason seemed lost on these men. The shorter officer barked an order for Ethan to step out, his tone laced with a venom that made Ethan's blood run cold. He complied, stepping onto the gravel with legs that felt like lead, the kids' gasps echoing behind him. The officers loomed over him, their voices rising, accusations flying, claims of a suspicious vehicle, of erratic driving he knew weren't true. Humiliation burned in his chest as they patted him down, their hands rough and careless, all while the children watched, their sanctuary shattered. But then, a spark ignited. Darius, his jaw set with a fire Ethan had never seen, pulled out his phone. His fingers moved with purpose, recording the zenith officer's aggression, Ethan's quiet dignity, the flashing lights casting harsh shadows. "This ain't right," Darius muttered, his voice low but fierce, a tremor of defiance breaking through his fear. Leela, timid but resolute, joined him, her own phone trembling in her hands. Marcus, snapping out of his daze, started narrating into his device, his usual humor replaced by a raw, urgent edge. The kids fed off each other's courage, their whispers turning to a chorus of outrage. They didn't just watch, they acted, capturing every moment, every injustice. their small hands wielding a power the officers couldn't touch. By the time the officers let Ethan go, no ticket, no explanation. Just a curt dismissal video was already racing across the internet. The kids uploaded it, their shaky footage paired with captions that screamed for justice. Ethan climbed back onto the bus, his legs weak, his pride bruised but unbroken. He met Dryas's eyes in the mirror, seeing not just a boy but a force, a leader born in that moment. The story spread like wildfire, igniting the community, parents, neighbors, strangers who'd never met Ethan but felt his pain. Marches filled the streets, their chants a thunderous demand for accountability. Forums sprang up, voices rising in unison, refusing to let the system bury this. Ethan's ordeal became a beacon, a cry against the abuse of power that had festered too long. In the days that followed, Ethan sat with Helen, watching the news replay the footage, his heart a tangle of gratitude and grief. The kids had done more than save his dignity. They'd exposed a truth, forced the world to look at what justice should mean. The officers faced scrutiny, their actions dissected under a spotlight they couldn't escape. But for Ethan, the real lesson lay deeper. Power, unchecked, corrodes everything it touches. Courage, even from the smallest voices, can tear it down. The community didn't just seek justice, they claimed it, proving that solidarity isn't just strength, it's a reckoning. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon, casting a pale golden glow over the quiet suburban street, when Ethan felt the weight of the moment shift. He'd been behind the wheel of the yellow school bus, the familiar hum of the engine vibrating beneath him, when the sharp wail of a siren pierced the air. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening as the flashing lights reflected in the side mirror. Before he could even process what was happening, a voice cut through the stillness, sharp and commanding. Step out of the vehicle. Ethan's breath hitched, lodging somewhere deep in his throat. His mind stumbled over itself, searching for an explanation. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. Not for something as mundane as driving a bus full of kids to school. The air inside the cab felt suddenly thick, pressing against his chest as he hesitated. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror, catching the wide-eyed stares of the children behind him. Their chatter had fallen silent, replaced by an uneasy stillness that made his stomach twist. He didn't want them to see him rattled. Didn't want this moment to spiral into something uglier. But the officer's voice had left no room for negotiation, and a gnawing instinct told him this wasn't going to be a quick, routine exchange. Swallowing hard, Ethan forced his voice to steady. "Can I ask what this is about?" he said, the words trembling slightly despite his effort to keep them calm. His heart thudded against his ribs, a frantic rhythm he couldn't quiet. The officer, a tall figure with a buzz cut and a face carved from stone, didn't respond. Instead, he jerked his head toward the door, a silent command that brooked no argument. Ethan's fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, the click of the buckle sounding unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He pushed the door open and stepped out, the cool morning breeze brushing against his skin like a whisper of warning. His boots hit the pavement with a soft thud, and he stood there for a moment, feeling exposed, vulnerable, as the weight of dozens of young eyes bore into him from the bus windows. "Move to the front of the bus," the officer snapped, his tone clipped and icy. Slicing through the fragile calm Ethan was clinging to, Ethan nodded mutely, his legs carrying him forward on autopilot. Each step felt heavier than the last, the gravel crunching beneath his soles as he walked toward the hood. His mind raced, a chaotic whirl of questions and fears. He hadn't been speeding, his speedometer had hovered safely below the limit. His license was clean, renewed just last month. He'd been driving this route for 15 years, a steady presence in the lives of these kids and their families. So why this? Why now? The confusion gnawed at him, but beneath it simmered something sharper, frustration, tinged with the bitter edge of injustice. Hands on the hood, the officer barked from behind him, his voice carrying an edge that made Ethan's jaw tighten. He complied, pressing his palms flat against the cold metal, the chill seeping into his skin and grounding him even as his emotions churned. The bus loomed in front of him, its chipped yellow paint a stark contrast to the pristine sky above. He could feel the kids watching, their gazes prickling against his back like tiny needles. He imagined their face Jadin with his quiet curiosity, Leela with her nose usually buried in a book, Brendan with his restless energy, and hated that they were seeing him like this, reduced to a figure of suspicion for no reason he could grasp. Behind him, a second officer emerged from the patrol car, his badge glinting in the morning light. Officer Thompson, Ethan noted, catching the name as the man strode toward the bus. His voice boomed as he addressed the children, loud and forceful, as if volume alone could assert his authority. "Everyone stay in your seats," he ordered, his tone sharp but laced with a practiced calm. "This is just a routine check. No need to be alarmed." But the words rang hollow, and Ethan could sense the lie in them. Routine checks didn't feel like this, didn't carry this suffocating weight, this unspoken hostility that hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. Ethan's chest tightened as he stood there, hands still pressed against the hood, the metal growing slick beneath his sweating palms. He'd been pulled over before once for a broken taillight, another time for a random sobriety test, but never had it felt so personal, so pointed. He risked a glance over his shoulder, catching sight of Officer Johnson, the one with the buzz cut, flipping through the stack of documents Ethan had handed over moments ago. The man's movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were savoring the power he held in that moment. Ethan's stomach churned. He'd done nothing wrong, yet here he was, pinned beneath the weight of their scrutiny, treated like a suspect in a crime he hadn't committed. "Mr. Hill," Officer Johnson said, stepping closer, his voice low and edged with something Ethan couldn't quite place: mockery, perhaps, or thinly veiled disdain. "Are you driving this bus legally?" The question hit Ethan like a punch, knocking the air from his lungs. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet the officer's gaze. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt building inside. "I'm driving legally. Everything's right there in your hand's license, registration, all of it." He nodded toward the papers, but Johnson didn't even glance at them. Instead, he let out a small, dismissive laugh that sent a jolt of anger racing through Ethan's veins. "We've seen a lot of fake licenses," Johnson said, his eyes narrowing as he studied Ethan's face. "Gotta be sure. You look a little out of place driving a school bus, don't you think?" The implication landed like a slap, and Ethan's mind reeled. He knew exactly what the officer meant: unspoken judgment, the stereotype lurking beneath the words. His throat burned with the urge to snap back, to demand an explanation, but he bit it down. He couldn't afford to lose control, not with the kids watching, not with the situation teetering on the edge of something worse. "I've been driving this bus for 15 years, Ethan said quietly, each word measured, a lifeline to keep his composure intact. "I'm just trying to get these kids to school. That's all I'm doing." His voice wavered slightly, betraying the storm of emotions roiling beneath the surface: anger, humiliation, fear. He hated that they could hear it, hated that the officers might take it as weakness. From the back of the bus, Officer Thompson's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Johnson," he said, his tone calmer, almost weary, as if he'd seen this play out too many times before. "Let's finish this up quick." But Johnson didn't budge. Instead, he prowled toward the rear of the bus, his eyes scanning the rows of children, as if searching for something to justify his suspicion. Ethan's heart sank deeper with every step the officer took. He could feel the kids' confusion, their fear radiating through the glass. He wanted to shield them from this, to turn back time and erase this moment from their memories. But he was powerless. Inside the bus, Darius, a lanky 8th grader with a quick smile and a sharp mindling toward his friend Marcus, his voice a hushed, urgent whisper. "They're treating him like a criminal for no reason," he said, his dark eyes wide with disbelief. "What's going on, man, mister? D doesn't deserve this." Marcus, smaller and quieter, fidgeted with the strap of his backpack, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," he muttered, glancing toward Ethan's rigid form at the front of the bus. "This is messed up." Ethan caught the sound of their voices and turned his head slightly, forcing a steady tone. "Stay calm, Darius," he called back, loud enough for the others to hear. "Everything's going to be fine. Just stay in your seats." But the words felt brittle in his mouth, a fragile promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The situation had already slipped beyond his control. spiraling into something he couldn't predict or contain. His hands remained pressed against the hood, his breaths coming in shallow bursts as he fought to hold himself together. The officers loomed behind him, their presence a constant pressure, a reminder that they held all the power here. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the front row of the bus, where Jaden sat, his usual calm replaced by a wide-eyed unease that made Ethan's chest ache. Beside him, Leela clutched her book, her fingers white-knuckled around the spine, her story forgotten in the face of this unfolding drama. And then there was Brandon, his phone raised once more, the tiny red light blinking as he captured every second of this indignity. "Stay in your seats," Ethan said again, his voice firm but laced with a quiet plea. "Everything's fine." He didn't believe it, and he doubted they did either. The air was thick with tension, a silent accusation that none of them could name, but all of them could feel. Officer Johnson was still thumbing through the paperwork, his movements slow and theatrical, as if he were putting on a show for an audience only he could see. Ethan's nerves frayed with every passing second, the injustice of it all clawing at him. He hadn't broken any laws, hadn't given them any reason to doubt him, yet here he was, humiliated in front of the kids he'd sworn to protect. Finally, Officer Thompson spoke again, his voice cutting through the haze. "Johnson, that's enough. Let's wrap this up." But Johnson wasn't done. He stepped toward the back of the bus, his gaze raking over the children with a scrutiny that made Ethan's blood run cold. "I'm just trying to figure out why this doesn't add up," he muttered, his voice dripping with suspicion. He turned back to Ethan, his eyes hard and unyielding. "You've been behind the wheel for how long? 15 years, you say? Well, I'm curious, how do you explain why we're not seeing you for who you really are?" The words hit Ethan like a freight train, stealing the breath from his lungs. This wasn't about his record or his driving, it was about something deeper, something uglier. He felt the anger surge, hot and wild, but he clamped it down, his hands trembling against the hood. "Look," he said, his voice cracking with the effort to stay calm. "I've got the paperwork. Everything's in order. I've been doing this job for years. All I want is to get these kids to school." Johnson's laugh was cold, a jagged sound that echoed in the stillness. "You've got to understand, Hill," he said, his tone mocking. "We've seen a lot of things that don't add up. Fake IDs, fake papers, we've seen it all." Ethan took a deep breath, fighting the urge to shout, to demand respect. He didn't want this to escalate, didn't want the kids to see him unravel under the weight of this baseless accusation. From the back of the bus, Brandon's voice rang out, sharp and defiant. "This ain't right, Mr. Hill," he shouted, standing up despite Ethan's earlier pleas. "They're treating you like a criminal for no reason." Jaden was quick to join him, his small voice trembling but fierce. "Why are they doing this? What's going on?" Ethan's heart sank as he turned toward them, his hands lifting slightly from the hood. "Guys, please," he said, urgency creeping into his tone. "Stay in your seats. I need you to stay calm." But Brandon wasn't listening. He raised his phone higher, the camera steady in his hands. "They've got no reason to treat you like this," he said, his voice growing louder. "And we're going to make sure everybody knows what's going on." Officer Johnson whirled around, his face twisting with fury as he spotted the phone. "You think this is funny, kid?" he snapped, storming toward the bus door. "Put that phone away now, or I'll make you." Brandon didn't flinch, his jaw set with a stubborn resolve Ethan hadn't seen in him before. "We've got every right to record this," he shot back. "You're the ones messing with Mr. Hill." Ethan felt the heat of the moment rising, a wildfire threatening to consume them all. "Brandon, please," he said, stepping forward, his voice tight with desperation. "Just put the phone down." But Brandon held his ground, and Johnson's glare shifted back to Ethan, narrowing with a dangerous edge. "That's enough," the officer hissed. "Stay out of this, or you're next." Ethan's pulse raced, instinct roaring to life as he moved closer to the bus. "No," he said, his voice sharp and unyielding. "That's enough. You're not going to lay a hand on any of these kids. They haven't done anything wrong." For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The lesson here wasn't lost on Ethan or on the kids watching from the bus. Justice wasn't always a straight line. Sometimes it was a jagged, messy fight against those who wielded power without cause. and the consequences of that abuse rippled outward, touching lives in ways that couldn't be undone. Ethan stood firm, his resolve a quiet fire, knowing that this moment, however small, it seemed would leave a mark on them all. The air grew thick and still as Officer Johnson stepped back, his eyes burning into Ethan's with a mixture of defiance and unease. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan could feel the weight of that gaze pressing against him, a silent challenge hanging between them. But then, just as suddenly, Johnson blinked, his composure snapping back into place like a mask slipping over his face. He turned away, muttering something low and unintelligible, the words swallowed by the faint hum of the morning breeze. Ethan strained to catch them, but they dissolved into the tension that still lingered, thick as fog. Officer Thompson's voice cut through the haze, sharper this time, laced with a commanding edge that demanded obedience. "Let's wrap this up fast. We're done here." His tone left no room for argument, a stark contrast to the uncertainty that had clouded the encounter moments before. Johnson didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than words. Ethan caught the flicker of frustration in the man's eyes, a storm brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't just the kids on the bus who'd rattled him, or even Ethan himself standing there, unflinching. No, there was something deeper, a gnawing irritation that maybe, just maybe, Johnson was wrestling with his own conscience. This wasn't how he'd pictured it going. Hen could sense that much. The officer had expected compliance, a quick resolution, but instead, he'd stumbled into a moment that refused to bend to his will. For now, though, they were backing off. Ethan felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly as the officers trudged back to their patrol car, their boots crunching against the gravel with a rhythm that echoed in his ears. He turned toward the bus, his legs heavy as if they were dragging through wet cement, his mind a chaotic swirl of thoughts he couldn't pin down. Climbing back into the driver's seat, Ethan gripped the steering wheel, the cool leather grounding him as he forced a deep, shaky breath. He turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life, its low rumble vibrating through the floorboards. But the sound felt empty, hollowed out, like a shadow of its usual comforting roar. Outside, the world had shifted sensibly, imperceptibly, but undeniably. The kids filed off the bus at the school drop-off, their usual chatter replaced by an eerie quiet. Their faces were a gallery of emotions, confusion etched into furrowed brows, fear glinting in wide eyes. Among them, Darius stood out, his lanky frame pausing as he passed Ethan. He gave a small, deliberate nod, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. "You okay, mister?" Hill, his voice was steady, but beneath it, Ethan heard the undercurrent of worry, a thread of concern woven into the boy's usual bravado. Ethan mustered a smile, though it felt brittle, like it might crack under the strain. "I'm okay," he said, the words tasting like a half-truth on his tongue. Deep down, a quiet doubt gnawed at him who wasn't sure he believed it himself. The ride to school that morning had been a stark departure from the norm. The bus, usually alive with the clamor of laughter and playful jabs, had sat cloaked in a suffocating silence. Ethan kept his focus on the road ahead, the yellow lines blurring slightly as he willed himself to concentrate on the task at hand, getting the kids to school safe and sound. But the encounter with the officers clung to him like damp clothes, the tension seeping into his bones. His hands, still trembling faintly, betrayed the calm he tried to project. He clenched the wheel tighter, hoping the pressure would steady them. But his mind refused to settle. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of the kids' faces, pale, eyes darting, their innocence tainted by what they'd just witnessed. Darius sat slumped at the back, his usual spark dimmed, replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural for a boy so full of life. Brandon, the chatterbox, who never parted from his phone, had tucked it away, his hands fidgeting in his lap instead. Jaden, quieter by nature, sat with his arms folded tight across his chest, his gaze locked on the window as if searching for answers in the passing trees. This wasn't just about reaching the school anymore. It had morphed into something far weightier, a moment that pressed down on them all. Ethan knew it, and the kids did too. He reached for the radio dial, desperate to drown out the oppressive quiet with anything: music, news, even static. But the crackling hiss that spilled from the speakers only mirrored the unease swirling inside the bus. As the school came into view, the familiar sight of its red brick facade and bustling courtyard stirred the kids slightly. They shifted in their seats, gathering their bags, but the subdued air lingered. Ethan eased the bus into the parking lot, the tires crunching over loose gravel, and watched as the students disembarked one by one. Most moved in silence, heads down, still processing the morning's chaos. Darius lingered at the back, the last to step off. Before he did, he turned, his dark eyes meeting Ethan's with an intensity that caught him off guard. "You're not alone, mister Hill," he said, his voice steady but infused with a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. Ethan nodded, the gesture automatic, though he fumbled for a response. The weight of Darius's words settled over him. The kids had seen it all, heard the officers' barked commands, felt the injustice of it. And in that moment, Ethan realized this wasn't just his burden to carry. It was theirs too, a lesson seared into their young minds about power, fairness, and the consequences of wielding authority without care. As Darius disappeared into the school, Ethan stayed behind, slumping in the driver's seat. The empty bus stretched out before him, the rows of worn seats staring back like silent witnesses. He wasn't just their driver, was their shield, their steady presence, a figure they looked to when the world grew unsteady. He'd always been there for them, navigating icy roads and rowdy mornings with quiet resolve. But now they were standing by him, their loyalty a lifeline he hadn't known he'd needed until this moment. It warmed him, even as the chill of the encounter lingered. After a few minutes, he gathered himself and trudged toward the driver's lounge, the tension still coiled tight in his shoulders. He sank into a chair at a scratched wooden table, ignoring the buzz of his phone in his pocket. There was no point in checking it, not yet. The day had already soured beyond repair. But then it vibrated again, insistent, and he relented, pulling it out. A text from Helen, his wife, glowed on the screen. "Are you okay?" Her worry bled through the simple words, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. "I'm fine," he typed back, pausing before adding, "Just been a long morning." He set the phone down and gazed out the window, where the parking lot buzzed with the usual cowspieces pulling in. Kids darting toward the school, oblivious to the storm that had just swept through his world. Life marched on, relentless, but Ethan felt trapped in the echo of that single, shattering moment. Then the phone buzzed again, jolting him from his thoughts. This time, it wasn't Helen, it was a news alert. His stomach twisted as he tapped it open, dread pooling in his gut. The headline slammed into him like a fist. "School bus driver detained by police in front of students." A chill raced down his spine, prickling his skin as he scrolled through the article. It wasn't just a dry recounting of the incident, it was a wildfire of outrage, questions, and raw emotion. Brandon, that quick-handed kid with the phone, had captured it all, and now the video was everywhere. The piece detailed how the police had held Ethan for further questioning, painting him as the villain in a story he hadn't written. Online, people were furious. Some called it racial profiling, others decried the heavy-handed tactics. The comment section was a flood of voices, strangers shaken by what they'd seen, demanding answers. Ethan's chest tightened as he read on, the weight of it crashing over him. He wasn't just a driver anymore, had become a symbol, thrust into a spotlight he'd never sought. Justice, or the lack of it, had turned this fleeting clash into something monumental, a mirror held up to a system that too often flexed its power without restraint. The phone buzzed yet again, this time with a message from Helena linked to a social media post. It was Darius, his words stark against the screen. "Thought this was just another day on the bus." "Nah, not for us." Ethan's hands shook as he scrolled through the thread. The video was spreading like wildfire. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, each platform amplifying the chorus of anger and solidarity. People shared their own stories, tales of brushes with authority that left scars, their voices rising in a collective roar. Strangers tagged him, thanking him for standing firm, demanding accountability for the officers involved. Ethan sat there, stunned, the magnitude of it sinking in. This wasn't what he'd wanted, not the attention, not the chowspit. It was happening, unstoppable as a freight train. Hours later, the principal called, his voice taut with strain. "Ethan, parents are calling in. They've seen the video. They're upset, some are furious. Others are heading here now. We need to talk." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll be there soon," he said, the dread deepening. The world had seen the truth, raw and unfiltered, and it wasn't letting go. He wasn't just a bus driver anymore, he was part of a reckoning, a fight for fairness that stretched far beyond him, fueled by the kids who'd watched it unfold, and the countless voices now echoing their call. Miles away, tucked into the bustling rhythm of college life, Charlie sat in his cramped dorm room, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across his face. He'd stumbled upon the video purely by chance, a shaky clip that had spread like wildfire across the internet. There on the screen was his father, Ethan, a man who'd always been a quiet, steady presence in his life, now transformed into an unwilling emblem of a struggle he hadn't chosen. Charlie's chest tightened as he watched, a storm of pride and unease swirling within him. His father hadn't asked for this spotlight, yet here he was, caught in its unrelenting glare. But then, Charlie remembered the words his dad had spoken years ago, simple, grounded advice about doing what's right, even when it's hard. Those words echoed in his mind now, steadying him like a lifeline. They reminded him that, despite the chaos unfolding online, Ethan had stood firm. He hadn't flinched, and that, Charlie thought with a flicker of a smile, was worth everything. Back home, the kitchen was warm with the scent of brewing coffee, but the air felt heavy as Helen stepped through the doorway, her brow furrowed, her eyes searching Ethan's face with a tenderness that carried an edge of worry. She'd been watching him closely these past few days, noticing the way his shoulders slumped a little more, the way his gaze lingered on nothing in particular. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft yet threaded with a quiet urgency, as if she feared he might unravel if she pressed too hard. Ethan glanced up from his phone, where endless notifications blinked like fireflies in the night. He forced a smile, the corners of his mouth twitching with the effort. "I'm fine," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "Just trying to wrap my head around it all." He shook his head, letting out a small, shaky laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "One bus ride, that's all it was. I never thought it'd turn into this." His hand gestured vaguely toward the phone, a silent nod to the tidal wave of attention crashing over him. Helen's lips curved into a sympathetic smile as she slid into the chair beside him. The wooden frame creaking under her weight, she leaned closer, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. "It's a lot to take in," she said, her tone gentle but firm. She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the glowing screen in his hand. "You've seen the comments, haven't you?" Ethan nodded, his fingers tightening around the device. "Yeah, some of them are out there wild stuff, but a lot of them," he paused, his voice softening as a flicker of wonder crossed his face. "A lot of them are from people who get it, people who know what happened, who see why it matters." Helen reached out, her hand resting lightly on his, her touch warm and steady. "There's so much support out there, Ethan, more than you realize. People want answers. They're angry, just like you are. But I know it's not easy, carrying all this." Her words hung between them, heavy with truth, and Ethan squeezed her hand in return. A silent thank you for the unwavering strength she offered when his own felt thin. "I don't know what's next," he admitted, his voice cracking just enough to betray the weight pressing down on him. "I didn't sign up for this kind of attention, but the kids, Darius, Brandon, Jad, and they were all there on that bus. They saw it all, Helen, and they're not letting it go quiet." His eyes met hers, a mix of exhaustion and awe shimmering in their depths. Helen nodded, her expression thoughtful, almost reverent. "They're standing with you," she said. "It's incredible to watch them step up like this. I never imagined it'd grow into something so big, but I'm proud of the man you." "I really am." Ethan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat rising as her words sank in. "I don't know if I can keep this up," he murmured, his voice trembling with doubt. "It's like the whole world's got their eyes on me, and I don't even know what they expect." Before Helen could respond, his phone buzzed again, a sharp jolt that snapped his attention back to the screen. His breath caught as he read the message, a new notification from Darius. "They're holding a rally outside the precinct. Some of us are going, including me. We're not letting this slide, Mr. Hill." Ethan sank back in his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. Darius, the lanky kid who'd always sat near the front of his bus, Cracking quiet jokes and keeping to himself, was now stepping into the fray. Ethan hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted any of it, but the kids had taken the reins, turning a single moment of injustice into a roaring call for something greater. They were standing up not just for him, but for themselves, for anyone who'd ever been shoved aside or silenced. "You're not alone," Helen said softly, peering over his shoulder at the message, her voice a soothing balm against the chaos in his mind. Ethan nodded slowly, his thoughts racing as the reality settled in. A rally, a protest. It was happening right now, and the kids weren't backing down. Neither were the parents, nor the growing chorus of voices online. The public's outrage was swelling, a tide he could no longer ignore. And amidst the overwhelm, a strange warmth bloomed in his chest, pride, raw and unshakable. These kids, his kids, were showing him what it meant to fight for justice, to hold power to account even when the odds felt insurmountable. By late afternoon, the streets outside the police precinct pulsed with life. A sea of bodies pressed together under the gray March sky. Signs bobbed above the crowd, their bold letters demanding justice, accountability, an end to the abuses that had sparked this fire. The air rang with chants, a steady rhythm of defiance that echoed off the brick buildings lining the block. Ethan's phone buzzed again, and he fumbled to open it, his eyes darting across the screen. Another message from Dryas. "Mr. Hill, we're here. We've got your back. Don't worry, they are gonna hear us." Ethan stepped toward his front door, the muffled hum of the TV drawing him in. He flipped it on, and there it was, live coverage of the swelling crowd. People of all ages stood shoulder to shoulder, some clutching homemade posters, others simply lending their voices to the cause. Parents he recognized from school pickups mingled with strangers, their faces etched with determination, and at the forefront, towering above the rest with a sign that screamed justice for Mr. Hill in thick black marker, was Dryas, the kid Ethan had known for years, the one who'd always been sharp, quiet, a little reserved. He'd shed that shell entirely. Now, he stood tall, his shoulders squared, his voice cutting through the clamor as he rallied the others. Ethan's throat tightened, a rush of emotion threatening to spill over. He'd always seen potential in Dryas, but this was something else, courage in its rawest form. A fire that had been lit long before this moment and was now blazing for all to see. And it wasn't just Dryas. Brandon was there too, his broad frame unmistakable as he handed out water bottles to the crowd, his usual grin replaced with a steely resolve. Jaden lingered nearby, quieter but no less fierce, his eyes scanning the scene as if daring anyone to challenge their right to be there. Even Tanya, the soft-spoken girl who'd once been too shy to raise her hand in class, stood among them, her voice joining the chorus. They weren't just kids anymore, they were a force, a movement. Voices rising together to demand answers, to demand change. The phone rang, jolting Ethan from his reverie. He picked it up, the school principal's voice crackling through the line. "Ethan, it's me. I just wanted you to know parents have been calling non-stop. They've seen the rally on the news, and they're all behind you. Some are even heading down to the precinct now. It's like a dam broke, support pouring in from everywhere." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical thing. "I didn't see this coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm glad they're speaking out. Glad they're not letting it fade." The principal's tone warmed, a hint of admiration threading through it. "You've done something incredible, Ethan. Your courage's lit a spark in them. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about all of them." Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze drifting back to the TV. Dryas's voice rose above the crowd, steady and unyielding, his face alight with purpose. In that instant, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He hadn't been alone in this fight, not ever. The kids had shown him what it meant to stand tall, not just for yourself but for the people beside you, for the community that needed a voice. The days that followed spun by in a blur, each one heavier and more surreal than the last. Ethan's name rippled through news broadcasts, social media feeds, and whispered conversations on street corners. He'd never dreamed his life be a simple existence built around early mornings, and the hum of a school bus engine could become the heart of a public reckoning. It was overwhelming, the noise and the scrutiny threatening to swallow him whole. But through it all, one truth shone clear: the kids, the community, they were with him. Darius, Brandon, Jaden, Tanya, they'd taken his story and woven it into something vast, something unstoppable. That afternoon, Ethan stepped onto his front porch, the distant roar of the protest drifting through the air. He could hear the cadence of their chants, a steady pulse demanding justice, not just for him, but for every soul who'd been wronged and dismissed. He'd never pictured this as his reality, never thought a single act of defiance could ripple out this far. But it had. His phone buzzed again, and he pulled it from his pocket with trembling hands. A text from Helen. "You need to see this." Attached was a link to a live feed. He tapped it, and the screen flared to life. Darius front and center, gripping a microphone as the crowd pressed in around him. His sign still hung high, its message bold and unyielding. Justice for Mr. Hill. The camera zoomed in, capturing the fire in his eyes as he spoke. "We're not just here for one man," he declared, his voice cutting through the din with a clarity that sent shivers down Ethan's spine. "We're here for everyone who's ever been treated like they don't count. We're here because we believe in fairness, in respect, in justice." The crowd roared in response, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the earth. Brandon stood at Darius's side, his jaw set, pride radiating from him like heat. Jaden and Tanya flanked them, their faces glowing with the same fierce determination Ethan had seen flicker in their eyes years ago, back when they were just kids looking for a safe ride home. Ethan's breath hitched, his chest tight with a mix of awe and humility. This wasn't his fight alone anymore, it was theirs, too. The community had rallied, parents and strangers alike united by a shared hunger for accountability. Darius had become their voice, a beacon in the storm, and the others had risen with him. A knock at the door startled him, and he opened it to find Greg, a fellow bus driver with a booming laugh and a heart as big as his frame. Today, though, Greg's face was somber, his usual grin replaced by a furrowed brow. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice low, cautious, like he was stepping into fragile territory. Ethan nodded, managing a faint smile. "Yeah, I'm good. Just trying to keep up." Greg stepped closer, clapping a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I saw the news. Those kids, they are something else. You've got a whole army out there, Ethan. We're all with you." The words landed like a lifeline, grounding Ethan in the midst of the whirlwind. As Greg's footsteps faded down the porch steps, Ethan turned back to the TV. The rally stretched on, a living testament to the power of standing together. He thought of Darius, of the quiet strength that had blossomed into this, a boy who'd once ducked his head in shy silence, now leading a charge for what was right. He thought of Helen, her steady hand in his, and of Charlie miles away, watching his father's story unfold. And he thought of the lesson woven through it all. Justice wasn't just a word, it was a force, a reckoning. When power was abused, when voices were silenced, there were consequences. The kids had taught him that, had shown him that the fight didn't end with one man's stand. It grew. It spread. It demanded to be heard. Ethan wasn't alone, and he never would be again. Ethan sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence as he stared at the untouched plate of food in front of him. The weight of the past few weeks pressed down on his shoulders like a storm cloud that refused to break. He could still hear the echoes of the rally outside his window, hundreds of voices rising together, chanting for justice, their words reverberating through the streets like a heartbeat. It had all started with him, a simple bus driver who'd seen too much and said enough. But now it was something far greater. The whole depot was buzzing about it, his co-workers exchanging hushed words of support between shifts, their eyes glinting with a mix of pride and disbelief. Greg, a burly man with a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, had cornered him earlier that day by the lockers, his calloused hand clapping Ethan's shoulder with a force that nearly knocked him off balance. "Man, you've got the whole place talking," Greg had said, his deep chuckle filling the air. "We're all with you, Ethan, every last one of us. We've seen it with our own eyes, the way those kids look up to you, the way you stood up. We know what's happening out there, and we're damn proud of you." Ethan had managed a weak smile, his throat tightening as he tried to find the right words. "Thanks, Greg, that means a lot. But it's not just about me, it's about all of us. The kids, especially if they're the ones who've taken this and turned it into something real. His voice wavered slightly, the enormity of it all sinking in. He hadn't asked for the spotlight, hadn't wanted the burden of being a symbol. Yet here he was, caught in a current he couldn't escape, buoyed by a support that felt both uplifting and suffocating. Greg had nodded, his weathered face softening as he leaned against the locker, arms crossed. "Yeah, I've seen that kid Darius out there leading the pack. Kid's got guts more than most grown men I know. It's something else, huh? Makes you wonder what we could have learned from them if we'd paid attention sooner." Ethan's chest warmed at the mention of Darius, that boisterous for his age, with sharp eyes that saw through everything had always been different. Ethan remembered him sitting at the front of the bus every morning, quiet but observant, his backpack slung over one shoulder like it carried the weight of his dreams. Seeing him now, standing tall at the rally, his voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity that silenced the crowd, had stirred something deep in Ethan's soul. It was a reminder that courage didn't care about age or sizeit bloomed where it was needed. Fierce and unrelenting, the kids were teaching them all a lesson in bravery, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amid the exhaustion. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dining room, Ethan sat across from his wife, Helen. The clink of plates and the soft rustle of napkins filled the space between them. But his mind was miles away, replaying the scenes from the rally. The streets had been a sea of fascising and old, angry and determined at their signs held high, their chants a symphony of defiance. News vans lined the curbs, cameras flashing like lightning, capturing every moment as the stories spread like wildfire across social media. Even the politicians, usually so quick to dodge accountability, were starting to squirm under the growing pressure. Ethan could still feel the pulse of it all, the raw energy that had crackled through the air. Helen's voice broke through his reverie, soft but steady as she arranged the silverware on the table. "I saw it too, you know, the rally. The news coverage, it's everywhere now, Ethan. Your story, it's touching everyone." She paused, her hands stilling as she met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength that anchored him. He nodded, running a hand through his hair, the chaos of his thoughts spilling out. "It's a lot to wrap my head around. I never thought it'd get this big. I just wanted people to see the truth, you know? And now they are finally paying attention." His voice cracked slightly, the vulnerability slipping through despite his efforts to hold it together. He looked down at his plate, the food blurring as the weight of responsibility settled deeper into his bones. This wasn't just about what had happened to him anymore. It was about the community banding together, about fighting for a future where no one had to endure the same injustice. It was about justice itself, a fragile, precious thing that demanded protection. Helen reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "They're not just seeing it, Ethan. They're standing with you, with all of us. This is bigger than you now, and that's a good thing." Her words were a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge of doubt. He looked up at her, and for a moment, the noise outside faded, leaving only the quiet resolve between them. As the distant sounds of the rally drifted through the open window, Ethan felt a shift inside himself. This fight had changed them. Alt kids who'd found their voices, the parents who'd joined the cause, the neighbors who'd stepped out of their comfort zones. They'd drawn a line in the sand, refusing to let their cries go unheard. And no matter what came next, they'd already claimed a victory, the power of their unity, the strength of their stand. It was a lesson in justice, raw and unyielding, a warning to those who abused their authority that consequences would follow. The days after the rally blurred into a whirlwind of emotions, pride swelling in Ethan's chest one moment, exhaustion dragging him down the next, and a gnawing uncertainty lurking beneath it all. He hadn't anticipated the tidal wave of attention his story would unleash. News outlets replayed the footage endlessly, his face flashing across screens from local stations to national debates. Social media buzzed with hashtags and heated discussions, strangers dissecting his every word, their support mingling with skepticism. Politicians scrambled to respond, their polished statements barely masking their discomfort as the demand for accountability grew louder. It wasn't just about the officers anymore. It was about a system that had failed too many for too long, a reckoning that rippled far beyond Ethan's own experience. He sat at the kitchen table one morning, his hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, the steam curling upward like unanswered questions. His phone vibrated relentlessly beside him. A flood of notifications lighting up the screen, messages of encouragement, interview requests, posts tagging him in solidarity. It was overwhelming, a deluge he couldn't keep up with. And there were moments when he felt like he was sinking beneath it all, drowning in the expectations of a world he hadn't asked to join. But then there were the messages that cut through the noise, the ones that mattered most. Darius had texted him earlier that day, his words simple but piercing. "Mr. Hill, we're all in this together. We're keeping this fight alive, and we won't back down. You're not alone in this." Ethan's breath caught as he read it, a lump rising in his throat. Darius wasn't just a kid anymore, he was a force, a spark that had ignited something unstoppable. Ethan could still see him at the rally, standing on a makeshift stage, his voice steady and fierce as he rallied the crowd. The other kids flanked him, Brandon with his quiet intensity, Jaden with his quick wit, Tanya with her unwavering resolve, each of them stepping into roles they hadn't been trained for, but somehow knew how to fill. They were showing Ethan what it meant to stand up, to demand dignity, to fight for a world that treated them as human. He set the phone down and leaned back, closing his eyes as the weight of it all pressed against his ribs. He wasn't ready for this, not the attention, not the responsibility. He couldn't turn away. Not when the kids needed him, not when they were looking to him to lead. The doorbell jolted him from his thoughts, a sharp ring that made his heart skip. He pushed himself up, his legs heavy as he shuffled to the door. When he opened it, Greg stood there, his broad frame filling the doorway, his usual gruff demeanor softened by a glint of something like awe in his eyes. "Hey, Ethan," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invite, his boots thudding against the hardwood floor. "You got a minute?" Ethan nodded, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "Yeah, come on in. What's up?" Greg settled into a chair, his hands clasped in front of him as he fixed Ethan with a steady gaze. "I just wanted to check on you, man. We've all seen the videos, heard the story. The depot's behind you, every driver, every mechanic. We're standing with you." His voice was low but firm, carrying a weight that made Ethan sit up straighter. "I didn't expect that," Ethan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Not from everyone. I don't know. I thought I'd be on my own with this." Greg's lips quirked into a small, knowing smile. "You'd be surprised how many of us get it. We drive those buses every day, see those kids. We know their stories better than most. We've watched them struggle, seen how hard they fight just to get by. What happened to you? That hit us hard. You're not just some guy punching a clock, Ethan. To those kids, you're everything, their shield, their guide, their damn hero. And now, you're their voice too." Ethan swallowed hard, Greg's words sinking into him like stones. He'd never seen himself that way, never imagined he could be more than a man who drove a bus and kept the peace. But Greg's conviction, the quiet strength in his eyes, made Ethan question his own doubts. "I didn't set out for this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was just doing my job. I never thought it'd turn into all this." "I know," Greg replied, leaning forward slightly. "But it has. And you've got a whole community behind you now, Depot, the parents, the kids. We're not going anywhere, Ethan. You're not carrying this alone." His smile widened, a rare crack in his tough exterior. "You've been the rock for those kids longer than anyone. You've got the strength for this. You just need to see it in yourself." Ethan let out a shaky breath, the exhaustion that had been gnawing at him easing just a fraction. Greg was right. The kids, the community, they were counting on him. For days, he'd been lost in a fog of doubt, questioning every step. But now a spark of purpose flickered back to life. He couldn't walk away in it when they needed him, not when they'd shown him what it meant to fight. Later that afternoon, Darius reached out again, this time with a request that made Ethan's stomach twist. The kids were organizing a town hall meeting, a chance for the community to gather, to share their stories, to plan the next steps in their fight for justice. Brandon, Jaden, and Tanya were already on board, ready to speak, their voices eager to be heard. And they wanted Ethan there too, not just as a presence, but as a speaker, a leader. For a moment, he hesitated, his palms sweating as he gripped the phone. He wasn't sure he had the words, wasn't sure he could stand in front of a room and say something that mattered. But then he thought of Darius, of the way he'd faced the crowd at the rally, Fearless and unflinching. If a kid could do that, Ethan could too. That evening, he made his way to the town hall, the air cool against his skin as he stepped inside. The room buzzed with energy kids clustered together, their faces alight with determination. Parents murmuring among themselves, their eyes weary but resolute, neighbors and activists filling the seats, their presence a testament to the movement's reach. Darius spotted him first, breaking away from the group to meet him, his small frame practically vibrating with purpose. "Mr. Hill, you made it," he said, his voice steady despite the excitement in his eyes. "We need you up there with us." Ethan managed a nod, his throat tight as he followed Darius to the front. When he stepped up to the podium, the room quieted, all eyes turning to him. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he gripped the edges of the stand. "Thank you for being here," he began, his voice low but firm, carrying a raw emotion he couldn't hide. "I never imagined I'd be standing here like this. Never thought a bus driver's story could matter this much. But I'm not just a bus driver anymore, I'm part of something bigger. We all are. This isn't about me, it's about us. About making sure no one else has to face what I did. About building a world where every kid, every person, gets the respect they deserve." The room erupted in applause, the sound crashing over him like a wave. He looked out at the sea of faced areas beaming with pride, Brandon nodding solemnly, Tanya clapping with fierce energy, Helen watching from the back with a quiet smile, and felt a swell of something he couldn't name. This was justice in motion, a community rising against the abuse of power, a promise that those who'd wronged them would face the consequences. The days that followed were a haze of meetings and media, his words from the town hall echoing far beyond the room. But Ethan wasn't alone anymore. The kids, the depot, the neighborsty were with him, their voices a chorus that couldn't be silenced. Together, they were rewriting the story, proving that even the smallest stand could topple the mightiest walls. Ethan sat in his dimly lit living room one chilly evening, the flickering glow of the television casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. His thumb pressed the remote absently, flipping through channels as the murmur of voices and static filled the air. He wasn't really watching it until the screen flared with a familiar scene. A sea of faces outside the police precinct, signs held high, voices raised in unison. The news anchor's polished tone cut through the noise, recounting the rally that had erupted in the wake of his confrontation with the police. Ethan's chest tightened as the camera panned to Darius, his young face alight with a fire Ethan had seen brewing in him since he was a boy, always claiming the front seat on the bus. Darius's voice rang out, steady and fierce. "This isn't just about one man, it's about every single one of us. We're done being treated like we're invisible, like our lives don't count." Pride surged through Ethan, warm and sharp, mingling with a quiet awe. That kid, once just a chatterbox with a backpack too big for his frame, had become a beacon, a voice cutting through the chaos. The community had rallied behind him. Behind the man, the momentum was swelling, a tide Ethan could feel pulling at his every step. But beneath that pride lingered a gnawing unease. Ethan knew the road ahead stretched long and treacherous. Justice wasn't a gift handed over lightly, it was a battle. And the system they were up against had roots sunk deep, unyielding as stone. The officers who'd stopped him that day, faces he could still see. When he closed his eyes shut, it faced so much as a reprimand. The media buzzed, the activists shouted, the community pressed forward. But it all felt like a storm battering a wall that refused to crack. One morning, as he sat at the kitchen table with Helen, the clink of her coffee mug against the saucer was the only sound breaking the silence. His phone buzzed on the table, a sharp jolt that made his heart stumble. The screen glowed with a name he hadn't expected, Officer Johnson. Ethan's fingers hovered over the phone, a tremor of hesitation running through him before he answered. "Hello, Mr. Hill," came the voice, clipped and formal, a tone Ethan remembered all too well from that day on the bus. He braced himself, unsure what this call could mean after weeks of silence. "I'm letting you know we're reviewing the incident. The department's looking into it. You'll hear something soon." The words landed like a stone in Ethan's gut, heavy and cold. He dared to hope for more, for accountability, for something real, but this was a dodge, a half-promise wrapped in vagueness. "So what does that mean?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay even. though his grip on the phone tightened. Are the officers being held accountable? A pause stretched out, thick with unspoken tension. Before Johnson replied, "We're conducting an internal review. The department's taking it seriously. You'll be notified when it's done." The line clicked dead, leaving Ethan staring at the blank screen, frustration boiling up like steam trapped in a kettle. An internal review. That was it. After everything, the humiliation, the fear, the way the community had risen up was left with nothing but bureaucratic smoke. His fists clenched, nails biting into his palms as he fought the urge to hurl the phone across the room. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through his spiraling thoughts. Ethan rose, shoving the anger down deep, and opened the door to find Darius standing there, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air. The boy's eyes burned with that familiar intensity, but today there was something else, a quiet, unshakable resolve that seemed to anchor him. "Hey, Mr. Hill," Darius said, his voice steady as bedrock. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ethan stepped aside, motioning him in, his mind racing with questions. Darius crossed the room with purpose, dropping onto the couch as though he'd been carrying a weight he needed to set down. "I just came from a meeting with some parents and activists," he began, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "We're figuring out what's next now to keep the pressure on. People are finally listening, and we can't let that slip away." Ethan nodded, the frustration still simmering in his chest, but now laced with a flicker of gratitude. "You've done more than I ever thought possible, Darius," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm proud of y'all of you. You've taken this fight somewhere I couldn't have dreamed." Darius shook his head, a quick, dismissive gesture. "It's not just me. It's all of us kids, the families, everyone who's been stepped on like we don't matter. We've got to keep going." Ethan's gaze dropped to his hands, weathered and calloused from years behind the wheel, then lifted back to Darius. "But what if they don't listen? What if nothing changes?" Darius's eyes didn't waver, sharp and certain. "Then we keep pushing. We don't stop until we get what we deserve, till we get justice. This isn't just about you anymore, Mr. Hill. It's about everyone who's ever been through this." The words settled over Ethan like a mantle, heavy but grounding. The fight had outgrown him, spilling beyond that single day on the bus into something vaster, reckoning for a system that had crushed too many for too long. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and Helen stepped into the room, her face etched with worry, but lit with a spark of determination. In her hand was an envelope, its crisp edges stark against her trembling fingers. She handed it to Ethan without a word, and he tore it open, his pulse quickening as his eyes scanned the page. It was an official letter from the police department, typed in cold, clinical prose. They acknowledged the incident, promised improved practices, but the officers' names were absent, no hint of discipline, no whisper of consequence. Ethan's shoulders sagged, the paper crumpling slightly in his grip. "They're still covering their tracks," Helen said, her voice low but edged with steel as she read the defeat in his face. "This isn't over, though. We're not backing down." He nodded slowly, her resolve bolstering his own. The kids, the community, everyone who'd stood with him, they were counting on this fight. And he couldn't let it end here, not when the stakes had grown so immense. The weeks that followed pressed down on Ethan like a storm that wouldn't break. Phone calls rang out at all arse reporters, supporters, strangers with opinions blurring into a relentless hum. Outside, the protests swelled, voices echoing through the streets, while the TV flickered with coverage that never seemed to tire. Each day dragged him deeper into the fray, a wave crashing over him again and again, leaving no room to breathe. The community's support was a lifeline, a roar of solidarity that drowned out the silence from the police. But it couldn't quiet the restless ache in his gut. Things weren't moving fast enough. The system stood stubbornly still, a monolith unmoved by their cries. One afternoon, he sat on the porch, the cold boards creaking beneath him, staring at his phone as messages poured in. Darius had sent a link to an article, and Ethan tapped it open, his eyes narrowing at the headline. Local school bus drivers' story sparks nationwide. Movementable is still silent. The piece chronicled the protests now rippling across cities, a chorus of voices demanding change. But buried in the text was a truth that twisted his stomach. The department hadn't uttered a word about the officers. It was as if they were waiting for the fire to burn itself out, betting on the public's exhaustion. Ethan scrolled through the commensum fierce with support, others dismissing it all as noise, claiming the officers were just doing their duty. His jaw tightened, anger flaring anew. This wasn't about one stop, one day. It was about Dryas, the kids on his bus, the parents who trusted him to bring them home safe. It was about a community that had finally found its voice. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from the spiral. It was Helen. "Can you come inside? The principal just called." Ethan stood, his legs stiff from the cold, and trudged into the house, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like a yoke. Helen sat at the kitchen table, her face drawn tight with concern. "What's going on?" he asked, easing into the chair beside her. She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "The principal said the parents want a meeting to talk about what's next, but there's more. The school board's pushing for a public forum next week. They want you to speak, to tell everyone what's happened. The kids, the community are behind it." But her voice faltered, her eyes searching his. "I don't know if you're ready for this." Ethan's throat closed around a lump he couldn't swallow. He'd never craved the spotlight, never wanted to be the one holding the megaphone. But the stakes loomed large. Those kids with their bright eyes and boundless futures. The families who'd rallied behind him. The whole community hanging on this thread of hope. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been facing cameras for weeks, but every time I open my mouth, it feels like I'm falling short, like I'm not saying enough." Helen reached for his hand, her touch warm and steady. "You don't have to have all the answers, Ethan. You just have to keep standing. They're looking to you because you started this, because you showed them what happens when power goes unchecked. That's the lesson here. Justice isn't free, and those who abuse their authority can't hide forever." Her words sank in, a quiet strength threading through the doubt. This wasn't just his story anymore, it was a warning. A mirror held up to a system that thrived on silence, and as long as they kept pushing, the cracks would show. Ethan felt the warmth of Helen's hand as she squeezed his gently, her touch a quiet anchor amidst the storm raging inside him. "You're doing enough," she said, her voice steady and soothing, a balm to his fraying nerves. "You've already shown people what it means to stand up for what's right. You've lit a spark in them. Ethanthire inspired because of you." But her words, kind as they were, couldn't loosen the knot of frustration tightening in his chest. Ethan's jaw clenched, his voice raw and strained as he replied, "It's not enough, Helen. We've shown them, sure, but nothing's changed. The officers walk free, the department keeps stalling, and I'm running out of steam. How long can I keep pushing when it feels like we're shouting into the void?" His words hung heavy in the air, each syllable laced with the exhaustion of a man who'd carried a burden far bigger than himself for far too long. Helen let out a slow, measured sigh, her eyes locking onto his with a blend of tenderness and resolve that made Ethan feel seen, even in his doubt. "I know it's tearing at you," she said softly, "but you can't let them grind you down. The kids, this community, are still here, still holding on to what we're fighting for. They need you, Ethan, more than you realize." Her gaze didn't waver, and in it, he saw a quiet plea. "Don't give up." Ethan inhaled deeply, the cool air filling his lungs as the weight of her words settled over him like a mantle. He'd always been a fighter, stubborn, relentless, but this wasn't just his battle anymore. It was for every soul who'd been trampled by a system that turned a blind eye, for every voice silenced by indifference. The fight stretched out before him like an endless road, but deep down, he knew retreat wasn't an option now, not ever. The next day dawned gray and heavy, the sky mirroring the tension coiled in Ethan's gut as he stood before a sea of faces. At the public forum, the room buzzed with restless energyparents clutching photographs of their children, local leaders whispering strategies, and community members shifting in their seats, all waiting for him to speak. He stepped up to the podium, the wooden surface cool under his trembling hands, and felt the collective weight of their stares pressing into him like a physical force. His eyes flickered to the front row where Dryas sat, his young face etched with a quiet intensity that belied his age. Beside him were Brandon and Jaden, their expressions fierce with determination, their small fists clenched as if ready to take on the world. These kids had been with him from the start, looking to him for direction, And today, their unwavering faith pierced through the fog of his uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of something new. He wasn't alone. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steadying as it carried through the microphone. Cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, "I know this isn't easy for any of us. What happened to me wasn't just some personal wrong. It's a thread in a much bigger tapestry, a system that's ignored too many of us for too long." He paused, letting the words sink in, his gaze drifting back to Dryas and the boys. Their eyes shone with hope, a fragile but fierce belief that fueled him. "But we're not here today just to rehash the past," he continued, his tone rising with conviction. "We're here to decide what happens next. We're not begging for change anymore, we're demanding it. We won't let this fade away. We won't let anyone else suffer what I did. We'll fight until justice isn't just a word, but a reality." The room exploded in applause, a thunderous wave of sound that crashed over him, vibrating through his bones. In that moment, Ethan felt his voice mattered not just to him, but to every soul cheering him on. It was a memory he'd carry forever. The forum marked a shift for Ethan, a pivot from despair to purpose. Standing there, with Dryas, Brandon, and Jaden in the front row, their faces alight with pride, he realized the community had woven itself into his struggle. Parents clapped with tears in their eyes, activists nodded in solidarity, and even strangers offered determined smiles. Their collective hope was a lifeline, pulling him from the edge of surrender. But as the cheers faded and the crowd dispersed, a sobering truth settled in his chest. The battle was far from won. The police department still dragged its heels, issuing vague promises and empty timelines. The officers who'd wronged him remained untouched, shielded by a system that seemed built to protect its own. Each day felt like wading through quicksands, low, suffocating, and relentless, and Ethan's frustration gnawed at him, threatening to unravel the fragile resolve he'd stitched together. That evening, he sat slumped at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across the worn wood. In his hands was a letter from the police commission, its crisp paper a stark contrast to the chaos it represented. Another investigation. It promised an in-depth review of the incident that had upended his life. More delays, more waiting, more nothing. Ethan's fingers tightened around the edges, his patience fraying like a thread pulled to taut. He'd seen this game before. Stall until the outrage fizzled, until people forgot. The thought made his stomach churn. How much longer could he hold on when every step forward felt like a mirage? Helen stepped into the room, her soft footsteps a quiet counterpoint to the storm in his mind. She offered a smile, but it was tinged with weariness, her eyes reflecting the same battle he fought. Still staring at that letter, she asked, her voice gentle but probing. Ethan exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "It's the same old nonsense, Helen. Another investigation, another will get back to you. I don't know how much more of this waiting I can take." She slid into the chair across from him, her presence steadying him even as his thoughts spiraled. "I know it's eating at you," she said, her tone laced with empathy. "You've poured everything into this, but the system, it's a machine. Ethan, it moves slow, and sometimes it's built to make people lose hope." His gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of sunlight bled into the horizon, painting the yard in hues of gold and shadow. The stillness outside mocked the turmoil within him, a world untouched by the chaos that defined his days. "I can't quit, though," he murmured, almost to himself. "Not with Dryas and the others counting on me. Not with this whole community waiting for anything shift." Helen leaned forward, her voice soft but infused with a quiet steel. "You're not in this alone, Ethan. I know you feel like it's all on you, but look around. The kids, the parents, the people out there, they're not just watching. They're fighting with you. You've got an army behind you, whether you see it or not." Her words sank into him, heavy with truth. He'd been so fixated on the roadblocks, stalled investigations, the unpunished officers, that he'd nearly missed what was right in front of him. The community wasn't just a backdrop. They were players in this drama, their voices amplifying his own. "Maybe it's not about waiting for them anymore," he said slowly, a spark igniting in his chest. "Maybe it's time we take the reins ourselves." Helen's eyes lit up, a nod sealing her agreement. "Exactly. You've already done the impossible. You stood up when no one else would." Now it's about keeping that fire alive, pushing harder, showing them we won't back down until justice is real. Ethan rose from the table, the letter still clutched in his hand. Its words now a challenge rather than a defeat. I think it's time we make a stand, a real one. We've waited on the system to do right, but if they won't move, we'll make them. Helen stood too, her resolve mirroring his. I'm with you, Ethan. Whatever you decide, I'm here, and so is everyone else. Her unwavering support was a lifeline, pulling him toward action. The next morning, his phone buzzed with a message from Dryas. We're organizing a march. The whole community's in. We need you there who need you to lead us. The words hit Ethan like a jolt, igniting a mix of pride and responsibility. This wasn't just about showing up anymore, it was about stepping into the fray, about demanding the system bend under the weight of their collective will. He stepped onto the porch, the crisp morning air washing over him, sharp and invigorating. The world felt heavy, yes, but it also pulsed with possibility. The fight wouldn't be won in a single day, but for the first time in ages, Ethan felt he was exactly where he needed to be. He turned to Helen, who stood in the doorway, her eyes steady on him. It's time, he said, his voice firm with purpose. We take this to the streets. When the morning of the march arrived, the air crackled with anticipation. From his front porch, Ethan watched as the crowd swelled in the distance, parents with strollers, teachers with handwritten signs, students chanting slogans they'd scrawled late into the night. Strangers mingled with familiar faces, drawn by whispers of a movement too loud to ignore. Dryas, Brandon, and Jaden stood among them, no longer just the kids from his bus route, but torch-bearers of a cause that had outgrown its origins. Their faces glowed with a fierce pride, their shoulders squared as if they'd aged years in mere months. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest, a cocktail of nerves and exhilaration swirling within him. This was the moment he'd both dreaded in Kravitz Point, where the fight became bigger than him, a tide he could only hope to steer. Helen joined him outside, her expression a mirror of his own determination. You ready for this? She asked, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He nodded, a quiet certainty settling over him. We have to do this for them, for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't count. Her smile was small but fierce, a silent vow. Then let's make sure they hear us. The march began with a rhythm all its own, drums pounding like a heartbeat, voices rising in a chorus of defiance. They moved through the streets as one, a river of bodies demanding to be seen, their chants echoing off brick walls and storefronts. Justice now. No more silence. Ethan walked at the forefront, his steps firm despite the weight pressing down on him. Beside him, Dryas gripped a megaphone, his voice cutting through the clamor with a clarity that belied his youth. Brandon and Jaden flanked him, their eyes blazing with a fire Ethan recognized as the same fire that had driven him to this point. They weren't just kids anymore. They were warriors, forged in the crucible of a cause that had become their own. As they approached the police precinct, the air thickened with tension. Officers lined the steps, their faces impassive, their hands resting on belts bristling with authority. Ethan's pulse quickened, but this time, it wasn't about fear or confrontation alone. It was about presence, about forcing the system to reckon with the people it had ignored. The crowd halted, their voices swelling into a unified roar, a sound that shook the ground beneath their feet. Ethan glanced at Dryas, then at Helen, and finally at the sea of faces behind him. This wasn't just a protest, it was a declaration. Justice wasn't a gift to be granted. It was a right to be seized. And as the chants grew louder, Ethan knew one unshakable truth. The consequences of power abused would no longer go unanswered. They'd keep pushing, together, until the system cracked under the weight of their will. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the streets as Dryas stood tall, his voice steady yet brimming with an unshakable resolve. We walk today, he declared, his words cutting through the crisp air, for every single soul who's ever felt the sting of injustice. His eyes swept over the crowd gathering before him, parents clutching their children's hands, teachers with weary but determined expressions, workers in worn boots, and families huddled close. We march for the kids who've been robbed of their innocence, for the families torn apart, for the teachers silenced, for the workers crushed under greed, for everyone who's been forced into the shadows, told their voices don't matter. Today, we shout to the world, we will not be ignored. We will not fade away. The crowd roared to life, a thunderous wave of applause crashing through the air, their cheers rising like a defiant hymn. Ethan, standing just a few steps behind Darius, felt the energy ripple through him, a jolt that quickened his pulse and set his nerves alight. This wasn't just a protest anymore, it was a tidal wave, a living, breathing movement swelling with every heartbeat. As they marched toward the precinct, the streets pulsed with life. The rhythmic thud of footsteps mingled with the chants that rolled off tongues like wildfire, sharp, unyielding, alive. Ethan's chest tightened with every block they crossed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The precinct loomed ahead, its gray stone facade stark against the vibrant sea of people. Officers lined the steps, their faces a mix of wariness and unease, eyes darting over the crowd as if trying to gauge its intent. But something had shifted. The air no longer crackled with fear, it hummed with unity. The people stood shoulder to shoulder, their heads high, their spirits unbroken. Ethan's legs carried him forward, each step deliberate, his shoes striking the pavement with quiet determination. When he reached the precinct steps, he paused, turning to face the sea of faces stretching out before him. The sight stole his breath, hundreds of eyes locked on his, brimming with hope, fury, and an unspoken promise. Today, Ethan began, his voice ringing out clear and strong. We draw a line in the sand. We're not here to throw punches or settle scores. We're here to be seen, to be heard, to demand that the world stops turning a blind eye. No more excuses, no more stalling, no more pretending the rot isn't there. We're here for justice, pure and simple, and we won't rest until those who've trampled on us answer for it. The crowd erupted, a deafening roar that shook the ground beneath his feet. In that instant, Ethan felt the truth settle deep in his bones. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person standing there, every life scarred by arrogance and abuse of power. They weren't just fighting for his story, they were fighting for their own, for their neighbors, for the dignity they'd been denied. Together, they were a force no wall could hold back. Hours later, the march had dispersed, leaving the streets quiet once more. Ethan stood in his modest living room, the soft hum of the television filling the space. His eyes were glued to the screen as the news replayed the day's events. In vivid detail, the swelling crowd, the chants echoing off buildings, and there he was, standing tall on the precinct steps, his voice cutting through the chaos. He barely recognized himself in that moment, the fire in his words, the steel in his stance. But it was the anchor's next words that made his breath catch. In a statement released this evening, the woman said, her tone measured, the police department announced that the officer involved in Ethan Carter's case, along with several others, is now under internal review for their conduct. No names were dropped. Number apologies offer just a cold, clipped acknowledgement that the department was under a microscope. It wasn't the full reckoning Ethan had dreamed of, the kind where the guilty faced the light and the wronged were made whole. But it was something, a crack in the armor, a whisper of accountability. He sank onto the couch, his chest tight with a tangle of emotions, relief, frustration, and a fragile glimmer of hope. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a message from Darius. We did it. Man, it read. We made them hear us. Ethan stared at the words, letting them sink in. It wasn't perfect, far from it. The road ahead stretched long and treacherous, paved with battles yet to come. But for the first time, in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a spark flicker to life inside him, a warmth he hadn't known he'd lost. They'd carved out a piece of ground today, shown the world that their voices could shake the foundations of power. The lesson was clear. Justice wasn't handed down from on high, it was forged in the sweat and resolve of those who refused to bow. And the cost of unchecked power, it was written in the faces of the crowd, in the scars they carried, in the lives upended by those who thought they were untouchable. Helen slipped into the room, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floor. She settled beside him, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his thoughts. How do you feel? She asked, her voice gentle but searching. Ethan turned his gaze to the window. The street beyond bathed in the soft glow of dusk. A faint smile tugged at his lips. Like we've finally broken through, he said, his voice low but steady. Like we've been heard. For the first time in too long, he believed I truly believed it. The fight was far from over, and the shadows of corruption still loomed large. But the community had taken a bold, unyielding step forward, a testament to what they could achieve when they stood as one. And Ethan knew, deep in his core, that as long as they held fast to that unity, no force could silence them. Across town, Darius leaned against his kitchen counter, replaying the day in his mind. He'd seen the fire in Ethan's eyes, felt the tremor in the crowd's collective voice. He thought of his little sister, who'd watched the march on TV with wide, hopeful eyes, and his neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, a grizzled old man who'd clapped him on the back and said, "You kids are doing what we couldn't." Darius smiled to himself, weary but proud. This was bigger than anyone of Theme. It was a legacy-taking route. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Officer Ramirez, one of the younger cops on the steps, sat in the break room, replaying the crowd's chants in his head. He'd joined the force to protect, not to oppress, and today had rattled him. He wondered about the officers under review, about the choices they'd made, and about where he'd stand when his own moment came. The world was shifting, and he felt it in his gut. Consequences were coming, slow but sure, for those who'd forgotten what power was meant to serve.